Email, what does it mean?
Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or news.
The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Conversation is the oral exchange of sentiments, observations, opinions, or ideas.
Forbes Books Radio presents The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett.
Joining me today on The Conversation is Sivaram Trikutam, Vice President of the Wi-Fi product line at Infineon Technologies, a global semiconductor leader in power systems and IoT. Sivaram has an electrical engineering degree from the Indian Institute of Technology and worked as an engineer leading large-scale integration teams in India before relocating to the Bay Area in 2010 to work in the semiconductor industry. Sivaram, thanks so much for joining on The Conversation today.
Hey, Clint. Nice to be talking to you.
Appreciate your time. So I like to think of the people who come on the show as kind of superheroes, and every superhero has a backstory. So what is your backstory? You know, what kind of got you from where you were to where you are now?
All right, that's a great way to start the conversation. So I grew up in India. I was a hardworking high school student, and then I went on to study electrical engineering. And I graduated in the mid-90s. And back then, software and software services were really hot jobs in India. And the semiconductor design industry was still in its relative early days, I mean, compared to what it is today in India. And I wanted a career in the semiconductor space. So I started my career working for a little startup, a very interesting startup that was developing semiconductors for optical networking. And optical networking back in the mid-90s was really hot. I mean, when the popularity of internet was growing really fast across the world, and all the internet networks were being upgraded everywhere. So I started here, and at this startup, I worked on all stages of a chip design cycle. And chips these days, right, they're much more complex than what they used to be. 25 years ago. So chips are so complex today that there are something like 30 to 50 different specialized engineering tasks that people do. Think of like building a tall skyscraper, right? And you've got people who do the drawings and the plans, people who lay the frames, people who lay the brick, people who do the plumbing, wiring, painting, and so on. So it's something like that, building a chip. I mean, you've got many specialized functions. But back in the day, we used to do most of those tasks ourselves, right? I mean, we used to make a drawing in the morning, build a frame in the afternoon, lay brick at night, right? And things like that. And yeah, we used to work a lot at nights, being in a startup. So of course, the chips were much smaller. We weren't building skyscrapers. We were probably building a single family home, right? And at times we didn't know how to do some of these tasks because these were early days. So we had to read manuals and try to figure things out. We failed many times. We learned from that and eventually got things to work. So I kind of made my bones here, so to speak, during that part of my early career. And from that start, I subsequently grew into various levels of engineering management, worked on different technologies, then got into technical marketing, into product marketing, and eventually into running a business, which is what I do today. And somewhere along that journey, about 10, 11 years ago, I moved from India to the Bay Area. So that's like a quick backstory, Clint, of mine.
Well, I'm a double E as well. So we got two double E's on the call today. So we like that.
Right. It's the fun engineering.
It is. It's I went to Georgia Tech, and it's definitely a difficult degree to get. But, you know, I was back in the day when they were still starting P-Spice. I'm not sure they probably don't even use that anymore to build our chips on. So, you know, I get the backstory for you as well.
Yeah, there's still people who use P-Spice, by the way.
Okay, there you go. So can you tell me more about Infineon and from a big picture point of view, what does the company do? And more zoomed in, what really does your role look like as the VP of Wi-Fi product line?
Sure. Firstly, about Infineon. I mean, we are a global semiconductor leader. We offer a broad range of products. Our portfolio spans everything from sensors to power to memories to security, microcontrollers, wired and also wireless communication products. And we serve a range of industries from automotive to industrial and infrastructure, and of course the IoT, right? So our semiconductor products are virtually every product that you use daily. I mean, be it your car or your refrigerator or your TV or your gaming console. I mean, anything that you use on a day-to-day basis. I mean, one of our products will be in those. And we at Infineon, we believe that semiconductors are crucial to solving the energy challenges of our times and to also shape the digital transformation of our infrastructure and societies. And this is why we are committed to actively driving decarbonization and digitalization. Those are two big pursuits for Infineon. And about me at Infineon, I run the Wi-Fi product line here, which is part of the IoT compute and wireless business. So I own the business and product strategy for the Wi-Fi product line. And I'm responsible for the overall P&L. I mean, for the product line. So I'm in a general management role. So it's not uncommon for me to be working on a range of topics on any given day. It could be a product development or an R&D topic, or it could be something to do with manufacturing or operations or finance or legal related. Probably meeting a customer to discuss how we could solve the problems they're working on, or and at times having interesting conversations with people like Clint.
And you just do design work on the weekend for fun, right?
Exactly.
So what do you think has been the key to success in your career so far? If someone listening really wanted to replicate kind of your success, what skills or attributes do you think should be focusing on or improving?
I don't know. That's hard. It's always so many different factors, right? And there's always an element of luck involved as well.
But I think it's hard work that puts you in the place to capture luck. I think so.
Yeah, that's true too, right? So, yeah. So I'll tell you a few things that I've tried to do throughout my career, right? The first, I've always worked very hard, right? I've not shied away from that, and I mean, long hours don't scare me. I mean, and that's something that I've done all through my career. So that's one part. I've always tried to learn new things, right? I've not been afraid of trying out new stuff. And I find that I've always learned a lot from those around me. I mean, just paying attention to what people around you know teaches you a lot. So that's something I've tried to do throughout my career. And the last thing I'd like to point out is, whenever I've seen that something needed to be done, I jumped in and did it, right? I roll up my sleeves and do it, not wait for somebody to tell me what needs to be done. And this I've found, I mean, from the early days of my career, right? I mean, there's always somebody that notices someone who's going above and beyond what they're supposed to do, and they pull you up to do something more, and that journey continues, right, through your life, and you get to do bigger and more impactful things as you do that. So those are some of the things I've done, which I think have helped me. But like I said, I mean, there's so many different factors usually, which come into play when you look at a long-term career. Right?
I think I have that in common with you, and that I like to work hard. And I remember that's kind of the key for me was when I first started my career was I'm just going to work as hard as I can and see where it takes me. And there's really you don't find a lot of people who work really, really hard that aren't successful. You know, it's usually you work yourself into success, I think.
Yeah, I don't think there's any substitute for that. I mean, of course, you need to be smart. You need to be at the right place at the right time, all those things, but you also need to work hard. That's what I find.
I totally agree. Tell me more about how and when you made the leap from being just an engineer to being a manager, and how did you transform yourself into an effective leader of both people and teams?
To be honest, I didn't plan my career as like a series of steps.
Right.
It kind of grew and it got shaped very organically. Right? I first became a technical leader, so not managing people, but managing projects, right? Which indirectly involved managing and coordinating between people. And about 6 years into my career is when I officially first time became a manager, right? And I was managing people. Then I grew fairly quickly from there, where I was building and growing teams. But through that process, I always was very technical and liked to be as hands-on as possible, because I found people don't respect a manager or a leader until they can speak their language. So you need to be in touch with the trade, so to speak, right? So I've tried doing that all through my career. And I've learned a lot on the job, right? I mean, of course, I've done a lot of structured learning in terms of going to classrooms or doing, I mean, mini MBA programs and so on and so forth, which teaches you theory. But then the real learning happens on the job, where you're applying the theory and trying to figure out what works in a certain situation and not. So I've never tried to very overtly emulate a certain leadership style or a management style. I've just tried to be authentic and be transparent with my teams, and my natural style is very collaborative, and that's done well for me over time.
So you think that's really been the key to you being effective in your role? Then is because you are collaborative.
I think that's got a lot of I think that's got a lot to do with it. Because once you assemble a good team, the members of the team, I mean, you have to trust in the team, and the team has various skill sets, right? I mean, somebody's strong in something, somebody's strong in something else, and as a leader, I find my role is to harness all of that, right? So I work in a very collaborative manner so that we can get the best out of the team, and we are a sum of parts, and not just I mean, the best guy in the team, right? You're not defined by that. You're defined by the collective.
Yeah, I've always felt the collective is smarter than the individual. That's good. As a leader of cross-functional teams, you have to essentially translate communications across your various departments, in different office cultures. I'm thinking that you think back to your days as an engineer, and I don't know how your world is, but in the world that I live in, all the engineers like to sit together because they all speak each other's language, right? They all get each other. And then all the marketing people maybe don't sit next to them. They all sit together because they speak their own languages. And those two groups don't like to cross-pollinate very much. And I think it's because, one, if I could be stereotypical of us, because I'm an engineer as well, we tend to be detail-oriented, kind of down in the weeds, problem-solving, and yet the marketing guys and gals are out there, pitching to the clients and strategic and big picture kind of stuff. And part of your role, I'm guessing, has to be translating between those two groups because the language is different, right? So I'm wondering how you handle that.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I mean, that's a really big challenge, and perhaps the most challenging part of my job. But it's also the most rewarding part of my job. And to do this well, you're right. You need to be multilingual, right? And what I mean is, every function, like you said, be it R&D or marketing or operations, finance, legal, HR, and then also the next sub functions in each of these, right? Again, not all marketing functions are built alike, or not R&D functions are built alike. Like in my world, in R&D, there could be analog design, digital design, manufacturing engineering. These are all different types of engineering, even though we classify all of them under one bucket of engineering. And each of those have their own unique languages, their own lingos, and which is based on the subject matter, right? And in order to lead a cross-functional team effectively, you need to know and speak all those languages to a reasonable degree of proficiency, right? And that takes time, it takes effort to learn, because everybody has their backstory, and you come from one particular part of this, and you need to make an effort to learn the language of the others. And I've done that. And we at Infineon, we foster a culture of collaboration as a company. We value employee engagement, both within teams and also across functions. So I try to keep my communication with my team very simple and as direct as possible, so there are no surprises. And since we're talking about communication, the other thing I find about that, right, is you can't assume that the communication has happened correctly. You always have to check and verify that it happened correctly. So I mean, usually what I do is I try to ask questions. And the answers to those, in a way, help me understand if I communicated correctly, not just the words, but the intent of the communication, right? So I think that's very important. You need to ask questions and check and verify that the communication has actually happened the way you intended it to happen.
It's funny. I opened this podcast with a quote from George Bernard Shaw that says, "The single biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has taken place." And I don't know if you played this game as a child, but there's a game we played when I was a kid called Telephone. And basically, it's 5 or 6 kids get together, and one kid has a secret, and they whisper that secret to the next kid, who whispers to the next kid. And of course, the fun of the game is that what the last person hears is not remotely close to what the first person said. And I find that actually translates, unfortunately, into the business world, where I communicate something, and by the time it gets 5 layers down, it's not remotely close to what I intended. And it's because the communication was one way. And I really like what you said, which is collaboration. And you said, I'm going to ask questions, which to me indicates we're going to have a dialogue. We're going to have a conversation about it. And so now when you say turn left, I can say, well, do you mean left at this next entrance, next to the next cross street, or left at the traffic light? You can ask those clarifying questions. So then your message really gets delivered in the way in which you intended. And then when that passes down to the next person, they can ask clarifying questions. And we hope in the telephone game, the answer comes out. The secret is the same. But in the business world, your message is delivered across the cross-functional team in a way that everybody gets asked those questions and it stays consistent.
Yeah, that's so right. And I think you had a great way of putting that. And that's exactly right. I mean, the clarifying questions are what make it meaningful in terms of communication. And also there are times when those clarifying questions are asked, you realize actually you didn't do a good job communicating either, and you get to calibrate your communication to that feedback, right? So I think that's very vital, like you said.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of conversation, and I'm also an observer of human nature. And I think that as human beings, we have this deep burning desire to want to check things off of our to-do list, right?
Yeah.
And the easiest way for me to check it off my list is if I send you an email or put something on Slack or Jira saying it's done. And what I really hope is I never hear from you again, because then it's off my list and I'm on to the next thing. But if heaven forbid I pick the phone up or walk down the hallway and say, hey, here's what I did, I don't want to do that, because what I might find out is it's not what I didn't do the right thing. And now I've got to add it back to my to-do list, right? So I think people have a tendency to fall on one-way communications because it's a protective measure, basically. And I'm a big fan, and it sounds like you are as well, of having a conversation to make sure we get the right answer.
Yeah, and especially in the post-COVID world, right, where we have so many ways of communicating now, and we are all so spread out, and we've got email and chat tools and all kinds of communication tools, it becomes even more tricky, right? And I find nothing substitutes a real live conversation like the one we're having now. And of course, it's not possible given the current state of affairs. It's not possible to do that all the time. So we need to be smart about what's the right way to mix in these kinds of conversations with the other forms of communication we do, right, on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I find that the one-way communications are ideally suited for yes/no answers or a summary of what we talked about in the last call. Here's what our marching orders are. Here's what we agreed to. But if there's deeper questions that have to be answered, I think it is usually best facilitated through some kind of a conversation.
Yep. And also the simple old tool of a whiteboard, that helps a lot.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I like to read the recommendations on the people that I interview on LinkedIn, and I read the recommendation section on your LinkedIn page, and people have written some really impressive things about you. I want to highlight a couple of them here. One was he has a unique ability to break down complex problems into simple, manageable modules. With that in mind, what is your approach to navigating these complex challenges and problems in the workplace?
I think that comment that you read, it was probably from my earlier days in my career. And it was meant probably more from a design engineering context where, I enjoy doing that. When there's a complex design problem, break it down into simpler, more manageable pieces, and they all need to fit together when you're done with them, right? So that's something I had a flair for, and I used to do that early on. But as you grow, when you're, the conversation we just had, right, about running a complex cross-functional organization, the theory is the same, right? You end up with these complex problems, which in totality look very complex, and you can't possibly solve them at that level, right? You need to break it down into smaller chunks in order to attempt finding the right solutions, right? And that becomes even more important with cross-functional problems. And breaking it down into smaller, and again, you can't randomly break them. You have to find the right way to break these into smaller pieces, right? So because they need to all fit back together. And once you do that, it helps you plan better. It helps you think better about those problems. It helps you understand and track progress better and so on. And again, at Infineon, like I said earlier, we are all about the employees, and we are a people first, company. So if there are any issues with people's roles and responsibilities, who's doing what, how do all these things come back together, I'm always open to like hearing those challenges and help work those issues out between teams, right? And this is part of like a day-to-day kind of a job that I do these days.
Right. No, I totally agree. Now, the second quote from LinkedIn that I wanted to mention was He quickly adapts to changing environments while keeping his team focused on delivering. So let's talk about leading a team through a period of change. And you've gone through quite a few different changes over your career. In those times, what was your strategy for keeping everyone rowing in the same direction? In all this, I've spent 6 years in the Navy. So to me, you have all these problems coming across the bow. And how do you keep your boat tracking in the same direction?
Change is tough, right? I mean, to start with, for everyone individually and also for teams collectively. And to make matters more interesting, oftentimes you don't have the luxury of a dedicated downtime to implement change. It has to happen while you're doing other things. It's kind of like fixing a train when it's still running. And I try to focus on the clarity of communication, right? When you're dealing with change, and over communicate when necessary. And it's also important to communicate the reason and the rationale for the change, because I find that getting the team's buy-in is very important. If the motivation, if the end goals, and the strategy to get to the end goal are clear to everyone and everybody's bought in, or at least most of the team is bought in, right? It helps in getting everyone to row in the same direction, like you said, right? And a common type of change management we have to do day to day is to deal with changing requirements. It happens all the time, right? We start out, working on a product, we're building a product, and then we learn about new requirements. We learn about new business opportunities, and we don't have the luxury of stopping and starting over. We have to change very dynamically, adjust to the changing market needs, and still get to the finish line with as small an impact as possible. And it's only possible if the team understands why we are making that particular change. How does it impact us? What are the ramifications? How do we deal with the ramifications? And is everybody aligned basically in pulling in the same direction? So buy-in, over communication, buy-in, I think these are two important things you need to focus on when you're dealing with change.
Yeah, I think so too. It's I couldn't agree more. You put it perfectly. I think to me it's about collaboration. It's understanding the why is so important, as you said, because if I was on your team and you said, Clint, I want you to go in this direction, I would just go in that direction. But if you said, Clint, I want you in this direction because our goal is to get here, now I know what the goal is, and I might be able to come back and say, actually, the better way is to go right. And so if I know what our goal is, I'm not just going to be a soldier marching on. I can actually help you get to achieve whatever the goal we want to achieve is. I think that's super critical that people understand the why we're doing this and not just the what we're going to do.
Yeah. And also, you're making only the big decisions on a day-to-day, on an hour-to-hour basis. People are making small decisions of their own, right? And if they understand the bigger picture and the intent, then it enables them to make the right calls, right? At a lower level as well. And that's why I think understanding the intent is important.
That concludes part one of my conversation with Sivaram Trikutam, Vice President of the Wi-Fi line at Infineon Technologies. Coming up in part two, Sivaram gives his advice for partnering with another company or team.
When you partner with someone, you need to have a very strong shared vision of what a win-win outcome looks like, right? And it's not important that you know you're part of the win-win. You need to understand the other's part of the win-win as well, right? And that's what I mean by having a shared vision of what the win-win outcome looks like. And it's also important to clearly agree on the mechanisms and the processes that you're going to follow to achieve that shared vision.
Thanks for listening to The Conversation. To find out more about Clint, go to clintonmpaget.com and pick up Clint's book, How Teams Triumph, Managing by Commitment, at Amazon. The Conversation with Clinton M. Paget is a production of Forbes Books.